welcome to London. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good. Yes. Had a burst gas main, so it's been it's been a very cold 5 days for me.
Oh gosh, is it fixed yet?
No, it's still on the works.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
But how's your sort of trip to London? How's it?
It's been great. Very brief, but good. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So congratulations with the film.
Thank you.
It's very funny.
No, thanks.
Which is great. I feel like comedy's making a bit of a comeback.
I hope so.
last sort of half a year,
Yeah.
it feels like there's been a real resurgence in sort of making comedies, because there was definitely a dead patch where it was like really hard to get stuff made. What's your sort of thoughts on that sort of?
Yeah, I mean, for whatever reason, it's been harder to get comedies released in theaters. It's harder to, and there's been fewer of them made. But people, it's my favorite genre, obviously. It's what I make. And I just think it's, the most human, relatable stories are told in the comedy genre, I guess, is what I would. And so I think it's gonna be evergreen. It's always gonna come back. It's always gonna be here. When everyone's like, it's comedy's over, I'm like, no, it isn't. It will just come back. Maybe in a slightly different form, but it'll always be here.
Well, it's a part of life, isn't it, as well? I mean, there's always drama and there's always seriousness behind comedy as well. There's so much subtext, and it's not just something to make you laugh. There's all these sort of great themes there. So let's talk about how this sort of conception started. How the project sort of began for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. The core of any great comedy film is that it's dramatic. You have to be telling a real story about real people, and that's people laugh to what they relate to. And that's certainly my approach as like a director and writer. In addition, I would say that comedy, anytime something serious has happened in my life or dramatic or sad, it's also very funny. There's also weird stuff happening. Like it's never like just serious. So whenever I watch something that's just serious, I'm always like, I don't really believe this, because it's like life is weird. People are weird. Like there's always, I always say like The Sopranos is one of the greatest drama ever made, and it was hysterical. So I think it's kind of, I don't really see separation in genres in a certain way. But yeah, with this movie, I thought of the idea. This is like the high concept idea, which was a double book destination wedding, and I was like, that's a really commercial idea, but I didn't have anything else, so I kind of put it on a shelf in the back of my mind. And then a few years later, I was thinking, it'd be amazing to make a movie for Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon. I've been obsessed with both actors my entire life, or my entire career, certainly. And I thought, that idea is really commercial and big and could be something that could support both of them. And then I started to develop characters. I kind of forced myself to develop characters and a story that would make sense for the two of them, and then pitched the movie to both of them, and they both signed on, and I developed it with them. And it was kind of an amazing experience. It happened very quickly, and yeah.
So let's talk about that sort of exciting part where you're coming up with ideas. You've got the idea for a double booked wedding. Like what's the next sort of step in terms of like research? I mean, did you have a clear idea where you were going to set it? Start off with?
From early on, I was like, I want it to be very beautiful. It needs to feel like it's on an island where there isn't any other option, where it's like, it's not like there's a town, you can't drive anywhere. It's an island. And it needs to feel small, and it's completely made up. Like that Palmetto Island doesn't exist. That bed and breakfast doesn't exist. It was all built on stage. And it was honestly created for the concept. Because I like this idea of kind of a very beautiful small venue for this wedding, where also it would be a nightmare to have two big weddings.
Yes.
So it had to be small, which kind of ended up, any kind of big hotel went out the door for that reason, in order to make the comedy idea work. Yeah.
Amazing. And I mean, was it, in terms of like building the stage, what was the sort of process for that in terms of envisioning? Did you always have because I mean, the doc is a very sort of key part of the proceedings, and there's a really nice stunt there which sort of goes on with the doc sort of falling apart.
Yeah.
Which I'm guessing, if you're doing that in a real river, is slightly harder to sort of, coordinate. So what was it? I mean, do you like to draw maps? Do you sort of mood boards in terms of how you're going to design the whole thing in terms of this like island idea that you sort of discussed?
Yeah, I mean, the doc, the doc that it was based on in my head looks nothing like where we ended up. But on my honeymoon, I went to this beautiful resort in Fiji that had a very long dock that went out into the South Pacific. Was just beautiful. And I was like, that does seem like the kind of thing you would have a wedding on, or you'd have something. And so, and I worked with my amazing production designer, Teresa Gulasarian, in creating this place. And it was created, there's some man-made lakes just outside Atlanta. We shot the film in Atlanta. And so we shot near these lakes, on these lakes. And there was a house that we kind of extended with visual effects to create the B&B, to create the Palmetto house. And then in the golf scene where Will and Reese are playing, she's hitting golf balls into the river or into the lake or whatever. What they're looking out at is actually, there are a lot of houses that we kind of erased with visual effects. So we make it feel very isolated. And that was due in no small part, like Teresa had really created a vision for it. And I was, and I also was very specific. I wanted to be an island off in the South. I just wanted this to be I'm from Miami, which is kind of Southern, kind of not. But I love the idea of a movie that really took place in the South. That seemed like really fun to me. And beautiful. And so we kind of created this fictitious island where all of this could happen. And so, when they're on the boat going, when they're on the boat, we shot using a drone, them on this boat. But if you go a little bit higher, you can see that they're in a very small lake.
Right.
It's like very, very small.
Yeah.
We were just high enough that you just see water. And so it feels like they're going away. There was also, not to get pretentious, but a bit of a Shakespearean feeling to me of just like going into the woods. Like there's, the characters all like leave civilization and go into the woods and have an experience in the woods and then leave the woods. And so I think that there was like kind of like, and in the woods magic can happen. And, and there was, I also thought about that conceit a little bit as I was making the movie.
I do think that like that mixture of kind of heightened reality and creating this journey into somewhere else, like the sense of journey, like physically in films is it really sort of sets the mood on getting into this island.
Oh yeah.
Rather than just being like, okay, we've just arrived somewhere and it's it is what it is.
Yeah, that was like with the opera and then on the boat and all of that. That's like they're going in the woods, and then I had that ridiculous montage of them driving away from the island is kind of them going back into civilization. It was pretty intentional because I thought the kind of storytelling it was harkening back to that sort of old time style storytelling.
So what's the challenges in terms of blending real assets with CGI? We've obviously got virtual stages these days as well. Like how was that kind of process from the get-go and sort of trying to create this?
It wasn't a ton of CGI. It was mainly erasing stuff, so erasing houses. We had this amazing LCD. I think it's called a LCD backdrop outside the B&B. Rather than it being like on stage, rather than being just a flat backdrop, we had this gigantic screen that we filmed. We filmed the location, so we filmed the lake and stuff. So in the background, you feel movement and stuff. And so we were actually even able to shoot Will and Reese walking up the steps with this backdrop, and you wouldn't know. So it's all practical. It's all actually, that wasn't even visual effects. It wasn't a giant green screen. It was a big screen that had the actual information on it. The more movies I direct, I try to do as much practically as possible and in camera. Even stuff as silly as like watching something on a phone. Usually I would burn it in, but if I don't have to burn it in, if the character can really be watching something that's been like really watching the video, it somehow is just always better. I don't know why.
Well, it's performance, isn't it? And it's immersion. I mean, like when you take people to somewhere and you sort of build as much as you can and you get a sort of a feel for it, and all of these elements, they just help performance.
Yeah, they help. Yeah, exactly.
And that, because you're obviously trying to sell something that they're not completely there. So it's anything you can do to sort of help that is definitely.
And they were, all the exterior stuff, they were really there. We were really on these very beautiful, like kind of woodsy locations. And then it was just the bed and breakfast. The interior we built on stage. The bedrooms we built on stage. The barn we built on stage. So then but the exterior of the barn was this beautiful location. And so it was kind of a combination of being on stage and making sure that when they run inside, they're running inside from like when it starts raining. The whole party runs into the barn, and then we pick them up on stage. So kind of, but it's all pretty. It was pretty practical. There wasn't, again, the visual effects was mainly used to erase houses and stuff like that.
Getting rid of stuff.
Getting rid of some stuff. It wasn't like creating a whole thing. Even the bed and breakfast, the core house was there. We just extended it.
Amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the actual character sort of building. You mentioned sort of building this for Will and Reese. So you've got the idea for the sort of basic story. Like what's the plotting out of the script like for you? Do you like to sort of go bullet points or a treatment? How many characters do you like to sort of flesh out before you sort of getting into the writing side?
I mean, I tend to write like a million crappy drafts is the way I describe my process. I write very quickly, and I write draft after draft after draft. Everyone has a different approach. This is just, for whatever reason, the way I do it. And I start by just listing ideas. Like I kind of like list lots of ideas on a document. That's actually before I pitch the movie even. I'm just like listing ideas. This could happen, that could happen. And then over the course of the many drafts, I kind of discover what the movie's about really emotionally. In this movie, what was interesting is originally it was Will and Will's daughter's getting married and Reese was the character getting married. And early on she said, I don't think this makes sense. Like, who cares if I get married? It doesn't, like, she was like, I think my sister should get married or something. Cause like, so what? The stakes of me getting married, it doesn't matter. And I thought about it and I was like, oh, she's 100% right. That totally makes sense. And so I changed it to her sister getting married. And it's suddenly the entire movie clicked into shape. That was a big moment where everything just suddenly worked. And then, so I kind of write it for a long time to get all those things working. And then once the casting process starts, I then rewrite it based on the cast the people I cast. And that also is, I talk to the actors, I kind of get a sense of who they are. I riff with them a little bit, and then that goes into the script. And so it keeps getting rewritten as I go along.
So did you have like other actors in mind as you sort of went on beyond those sort of initial sort of two leads? Because I mean, it feels like a real mix of like fresh faces and less fresh faces and really established actors.
Yeah, the only person who I knew I wanted to cast was Geraldine Viswanathan. I knew it from the beginning. I just was like, she's so good. She's such a good actress and she's so funny, but she's really grounded. And she just, for some reason, seems like Will Ferrell's daughter. I don't know why. She just has like a playfulness about her. There's something about her just even that I believed it. And so I started with she was in my head, and then the casting, my amazing casting agents, Jeannie McCarthy and Nicole Bellera, they pitched Meredith Hagner to play the sister, and she did the table read, and she was perfect, and they seemed like it was a really funny dynamic between the two of them. And then Reese pitched Leanne Morgan, who's plays her older sister, who's been doing stand-up for a while, has kind of blown up in the stand-up world, but is this was her first movie and had no idea. Every day she was like, I have no idea what's going on. Like she was very like upfront about having literally no.
Yeah, fish out of water something.
Yeah. She was just like, I was like, so your mark's over there, and she's like, what's a mark? And it was like amazing. I love her so much, and she's so funny. And Reese also pitched Celia Weston for the mom, and which was the perfect casting. Like, so Reese and Will have great instincts too. They pitched Will pitched Jimmy Tatro to play Meredith's husband, who's so funny. And then Rory Scovel, someone who I've loved as a comic forever, and I was really hoping we'd get him for the brother, and he was really into it. And so, anyways, it kind of naturally just happened, and I knew I wanted it to be really. I love big casts. I like a lot of characters. I like Vinnie Thomas is someone who I'm obsessed with, who played her assistant, who I've worked with now a number of times.
Yeah. I definitely recognize him from some of your,
Yeah. I just am obsessed with him. I think he's so funny and weird. And he was in Bros, but we had to cut him out of Bros. That's where I met him. Billy Eichner actually put him on my radar, and then I put him in Platonic, and he's just so funny. So, or my wife and I put him in Platonic. So, but anyways, it kind of naturally kind of expands like that.
So, in terms of like how you're working with them in terms of developing the script, you've obviously done quite a few drafts by the time you get to the actors, and you said they had sort of input. Like, how does that sort of shaping go in terms of the story or the character arcs from what you'd written initially to maybe their involvement?
Well, I mean. Will and Reese, like they had like that. Reese had that one big note, but they didn't really have. They had kind of macro notes. Will had a big note. There was a moment in the early outline where like he gets mad at Reese really early in the movie. He kind of attacks her, in some way. And he said to me, I just don't think I would do that. Like it doesn't feel like I would be that mad that quickly. And I looked at it and I was like, yeah, he's totally right. And so, it was a kind of adjusting that. I always love collaborating with actors, because I always say that the writer and director, as a writer-director, I'm always thinking about what the plot and what should happen next. And actors are always thinking about, but would a human do that? Is that something is that normal human behavior?
Is it plausible? Yeah.
Would I, like, I'm the person who has to literally walk across the room. Would I, whatever. And so they had macro kind of notes, but they didn't really have like lots of little notes. They were pretty kind of confident, I think, in where we would end up. And then when I wrote the draft, there were certainly thoughts and notes and stuff, but it wasn't. I mean, I tend to be ahead of it too. I'm constantly being like, does this suck? Does this suck? Does this? I'm never thinking like, this is great, until the movie's done. Once the movie's done, then I'm like, okay, I think we pulled it off.
When you're in the theater and everyone's laughing, it's okay, this works.
Okay, it works. But I never think it's great. And if someone of their stature, or honestly, if anyone has an issue with something, I take it seriously, because you just never know. When I'm writing something, I'm very close to it. It's hard to see the big picture. And so yeah.
I suppose it's a bit difficult as well when you've got actors that are that funny, because it's probably, I'm guessing on set, it's kind of like an echo chamber where it is just so funny being around all this stuff that's going on and sort of trying to cipher through that. I mean, do you sort of go through dailies at the end of days to check, to make sure, because I suppose in drama you look to see if the emotion was there, and in comedy do you sort of check to see if the jokes landed the way that you thought they did sort of on set?
I watch cut scenes a lot of times, and I'm constantly talking to my editors and asking them if I need to pick anything up or reshoot anything. I've started to do, on most of my movies up until Bros, I would always do 2 to 3 days of additional photography and just reshoot stuff. And it's kind of normal to kind of to just fix some stuff. On Bros, we had worked on that script for so long that by the time we shot it, we just, Billy and I knew it backwards and forwards, and it just we didn't need reshoots. And then on this movie, it kind of just all worked. There was never a moment where I was like, I feel as if I did there was one sequence I had to I kept picking up shots for, which was when Reese and her family knock over the cake. I just needed more pieces and more pieces, and so I kept picking up more pieces as we were shooting, because I would look at the cut and I was like, oh, I don't have enough pieces for this weird action sequence. And then in post, I did have to shoot a shot of Will and a shot of the cake, and some, I think the shot where the cake's flying in his face, it's so silly. I just needed, there was just some...
Well, it's stylized, isn't it?
Yeah, there was just some stuff I needed to pick up in post, but it was literally probably 4 hours of shooting in post but that was from constantly talking to my editors and making sure I had the footage.
How do you sort of find that balance between what you've got in the script versus, I guess, comedy actors that have lots of ideas and improv and lots of kind of, I suppose, adapting in the moment to stuff like that? Do you allow quite a lot of sort of changes in those bits? Because I mean, sometimes it doesn't work for the story. Sometimes it's great from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mainly only worried. I don't care about changing dialogue or jokes or anything like that. It's only if it starts to affect the story. And I actually have been pretty lucky. I mean, generally, by the time we're shooting the movie, everyone has signed off on the script and gets what's happening. I think there are those actors who kind of walk in and throw stuff out. I haven't worked with those kinds of people before, and there's certainly a benefit for that. Everyone's bringing an interesting thing to the table. With this movie, and honestly, with most of the movies I've done, an actor might be like, "Oh, I wouldn't say it this way; I'd say it that way," and I'm like, "Sure, do it however you want." It's not, it's as long as it doesn't affect the story point. And so I'm also constantly thinking it's pretty easy as a comedy director, get lost in the jokes in the scene, and not take a step back and be like, but what is the point of the scene, And so, there's people behind the monitors who help me. I have a friend of mine, Brendan O'Brien, was a executive producer on the film. He's a really funny writer. He co-wrote the first Neighbors movies and wrote a Bad Neighbors movie. And so he was on set, and he would come over to me and he would pitch jokes and stuff, but he had jokes that he'd written, but he also would say hey, I think emotionally you need to redo that. And I'd be like, oh yeah, you're right. So it's nice to have a second set of eyes sometimes.
I suppose that's the thing. If the emotion and the characters aren't kind of landing and the story isn't keeping you compelled, you immediately are drawn out of it, and then you're not laughing at the jokes because you're aware you're watching something rather than sort of going along the ride. So it's definitely something not to sort of miss.
Yeah, you have to always be checking that the emotion that you're checking back in with the emotion, and that all of that really happens in the writing stage. It's writing. I think it would be very scary to be writing while shooting, because you're trying to figure out your movie while you're shooting the movie. That seems very scary to me. Usually, when I'm pretty organized, and usually by the time I'm shooting, I really know what the movie's about, and I could defend. A friend of mine said we had a table read for a movie, it was for Storks. Finally, Storks was this movie that I wrote and directed, this animated movie, was finally starting to work in the animatics, and this executive at Warner Brothers said, yes, the movie is now defendable. And I was like, that's like, you want your movie to be defendable by the time you get to by which I mean you can explain why every move is there, to anyone,
So in terms of how you wanted to shoot it, lens choices, all those kind of things, and also I suppose for, timing and making sure some of the set pieces sort of came together, what's your process in terms of the cinematographer, figuring out that collaboration, how to sort of get the pace of the film as well? So.
Yeah, I mean, so the cinematographer is this great guy named John Guleserian. He did. I worked with him on. My wife and I worked with him on the Platonic, both seasons of Platonic, and worked with him on our show that we did called Friends from College. That was on Netflix, and he's just awesome. He's married to the production designer on the movie, Teresa Guleserian, and so
that's a great combo.
It's a great because she builds in the lighting that he's asking for. So there's a great collaboration there. He and I speak the same language. He's, first of all, very fast, which is important. I don't want, you never want a DP who's just like very carefully lighting one person or something.
One light in the background, they're tweaking it for an hour, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain kind of movie that's important, but his light is really beautiful. His composition is amazing. This was a movie where I wanted every frame to have like 5 people in it. Because it's a wedding movie. And so I didn't ever want it to just be, I mean, with rare exception, there's moments where Will and Reese are together, or Will and his daughter, or Reese and her sister, But it was always going to be a lot of people. I said to John early on, I was like, I think we're going to have 3 cameras basically every time we shoot. So let's build the sets so they can accommodate 3 cameras. It was more about that. And I also said I want it to be pretty beautifully composed. Like Bad Neighbors is a movie where the entire film was handheld. Both movies were handheld. And it kind of had a little bit of a rough, edgy aesthetic. Intentionally, it's a little bit of it's as close to an action comedy as I've done.
Yeah.
This movie I wanted to be, chaos in a beautiful place. So I thought back to Sarah Marshall where the shots were pretty composed. There isn't much handheld, maybe no handheld. Maybe there's one handheld sequence in the movie, but it's not a handheld film. It's very, we used a lot of dolly. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the conversations we had.
It's a nice way, like, especially because it is a wedding, and it did sort of, I was thinking about Sarah Marshall as I was watching this as well, because it does have that, like, stillness that almost allows the ensemble to breathe.
Yeah.
Because you get to see, I mean, because you've got so many people in shot, which is, a challenge in itself, but you're getting to see all the sort of background performances and the subtle sort of, interactions between everyone, not just the kind of the 2 or 3 people that are talking.
There's always, like, 5 things happening on screen at all times, and that's what I wanted. It was a really fun, the moment when Reese kind of gets into a fight with her mom and then talks about all her siblings. The shot of her and her siblings I love because you see her siblings look at her like, what are you doing? You see it happening. You see the whole thing happening in that shot. And so I think that's really what I was going for was, it's a wedding. It's almost like every scene, every shot is a wedding photo. You have just tons of people in every shot. And then there's certain moments where Will's isolated or Reese is isolated, that kind of thing. I also wanted intentionally beautiful moments, like when she's hitting golf balls into the water is supposed to be a very pretty moment, which then is, undercut when Will admits that he did this thing to her wedding and she suddenly loses her mind. So, it's kind of, it's fun to just kind of take the audience on this ride.
Yeah, and you've got to find the peaks and the troughs as well between the funny moments and the more still, calm moments, because otherwise if it's just 100 people in a room all the way through or in a space all the way through, then you don't sort of get time to appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think the moment the movie really takes off is when Will is outside toasting his dead wife. It's the moment you feel the audience be like, wait a minute, this isn't just silly. There's something else happening here. And when Reese sees him and you feel there's a connection there between them, which is, that moment is, I just love that moment because it is this moment. What's funny about that moment is we did a split screen there to time it out exactly. So,
right.
So we did use technology to time it out, but it's a really beautiful moment, and it's done in one shot. I think I'd cut then type to Reese, but you see it in one shot. You see their connection in one shot, which is it's all little things like that.
Yeah, it all feeds into the subconscious, whether you're concentrating on the other people in the background or not.
Yeah,
it's all sort of building.
They're connected.
Layer. Yeah. Is there any danger of over rehearsing when you're doing comedy in terms of pushing the joke to the point where everyone's done the joke and everyone's laughed at the joke? How do you sort of avoid that as a sort of pitfall?
I think the thing that I've learned as a director is more confidence to do fewer takes. I think in the past I would shoot tons of alt jokes and do many takes. I mean, not I would do like 7 takes, not like 100 takes, but I do like 7 takes. Now I probably average 3 to 4 takes, if that, and it's because I kind of know I got it, and like you don't really get much more after that. It depends on the actor you're working with. Some actors warm up and take a few more takes, but on this movie, I was like, I would get it pretty quickly, and feel like, okay, I have what I need here, and then I can move on. So, but I always do rehearsals before we shoot the movie because it's a no pressure, and it's literally probably like 3 mornings. It's not like a ton of time, but we kind of read through the script. If there's like it wasn't in this, but if there's like a sex scene, I might, just so the actors feel comfortable, like I brought a bed into like a room and like blocked it with everyone to make sure everyone feels comfortable with what we're doing. But it really, on this movie, it was reading through the whole script with all the actors in a no time pressure situation where, and it was the first time I'd worked with, like, as an example, Leanne Morgan. And so we read through all of her stuff and I was like, this doesn't sound like your voice. Let's adjust it so it's your voice. So it was there was stuff like that happened in that rehearsal. So it's kind
of like getting people comfortable and just getting the actual words out.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing you've done all the sort of, the prep on terms of what the characters are, and they've done that, and what the
I like know what the story point is, but like what the characters are saying might not support it for that actor, and so then I adjust what they're saying. So it changes. The script will change in the rehearsal. The rehearsal is really more for me than it is for the actors. It's for me to familiarize myself.
Yeah, and to get it into your head, I suppose, like how they're saying it, and to sort of build that picture that's different from the script.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what's just as a sort of a wrap up sort of topic, like how do you think comedy has maybe changed from when you were first starting? And is there any like advice on, I don't know, getting into making comedy films?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to tell because I've just been now weirdly doing it for a while. I mean, I think that, people are like, I'm often like, I've been asked on this junket, like, is it harder to do jokes? Is it harder because of whatever, because of social media? And I haven't noticed it. I think it's always the same thing, which is you have to tell a story that has an honest emotional core, and that is, and that's coming from character, and the comedy has to come from character. And like, so, that kind of answers most questions, and that's always going to be true. I'll watch a movie like The Apartment, and it's honestly like pretty feels pretty contemporary, in certain ways. Or like When Harry Met Sally is a movie I watch over and over again, and it feels pretty contemporary. And I think the classic movies follow the same rules, which is what is the core character? What do they need? Trading Places is a movie that I love watching. It's a very different kind of movie, but that couldn't feel more appropriate now, given where we are in the world right now. It's just. And these are movies that are true to their characters, and will they have jokes that fall flat? Sure, of course, but for the most part, they're still hilarious and they still work great. So I just think and they all come from character. So I
suppose that's it. Like, the pitfall is always when you try and create a joke to be funny rather than because it's actually from where someone's backstory and who they are and those kind of things. And when it sort of jars with that, that's kind of when you lose people. When it comes from something real, then it's human.
Yeah, when it comes from something real, an emotional thing that the character's going through, then it's always going to work, or often going to work.
So just going back to your early, start point, like how you got into film, and like what were some of the biggest hurdles, do you think, to making your first sort of breaks, I guess?
I mean, I was like, I think the first movie is always the hardest thing to get to do, and I was just very lucky. I basically, I was Judd Apatow was my big mentor figure, and I had worked, with Jason Segel on this TV show called Undeclared that was about college that Judd was the creator on, and so Jason and I became really close. We kind of shared a creative interest in love and like relationship comedy, and so. I kind of, I'd written a bunch of screenplays by that time, and Jason was working on Sarah Marshall. And so I kind of asked Judd, hey, will you support me as the director if I kind of help Jason rewrite this? And he said yes. And you kind of just have to look for your entry. And I was like, I feel like this is an entry moment because Judd has some leverage right now. He's just made a hit with 40-Year-Old Virgin. And I kind of found my way in very quickly in that moment. And you're kind of always looking for that. I think now it's like, it's so easy to make things with your phone. And a lot of comedy is just people talking. When I think about a movie, this came out a while ago, but like Sean Baker's first movie, Tangerine, that's like an incredible movie made on his phone, and you didn't need much more than your phone, So I think now, if I was doing it, I probably would just try to make a movie, like some small budget thing on my phone. That was much harder at the time when I started. Or you find your way through writing. There's not a lot of good writers, there are a lot of bad scripts out there. So if you write a good script, it will find its way, I think.
Yeah. And finding the right people to collaborate with.
Exactly,
That's definitely
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you, Nicholas. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you. Thanks.
Thanks.